Awesome. Welcome back, everyone. I'm joined this week by Justin and Juan, and we're going to be talking about the creator economy and everything involved with creators. And I'm excited about that conversation because I honestly don't think I know two people more passionate about all of this, and that makes it pretty great. So Juan's an accountant that works with a ton of creators, including, even acting as a business manager for some larger ones. And then Justin is one of the most unique creators I've ever met because I remember thinking of him as the LinkedIn guy for a while. And then all of a sudden, TikTok comes around and this guy's killing TikTok too. So I'll let you guys talk a little bit more about yourselves in a second. But um, when I say the word creator economy, what does that even mean? Can you kind of just let us in on what you think of when you hear that, Justin?
So for me, when I hear the word creator economy, it's simple, right? Creators, I think a lot of people understand what a creator is, whether you're creating content on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, etc. It used to be called influencer, but I prefer the word creator. Influencer has like a weird, ugly connotation to me, at least. But it's just like combining creators with making money. And I think before that used to just be with like brand deals and AdSense on YouTube and things like that. But now that's starting to broaden with like creators making businesses, even specifically for Declassified, like we're more considered a media company rather than just like me as a creator. So I think that's what the creator economy is evolving into is just a broad way of saying how content creators are making money in any way, shape, or form.
Okay. And you mentioned declassified. Can you remind people what that is?
Yeah. So with Declassified, that's my media company. It's called Declassified Media. Basically, you can think of us as like BuzzFeed or Overtime Sports, but specifically for the college to career kind of education niche. So the same way that Overtime Sports has like Overtime Soccer, Overtime Football, Overtime Basketball, etc. We have Declassified College and starting to build out different niches of Declassified MBA, Declassified Comp Sci, and things like that.
Awesome. And you mentioned ways that people make money. Juan, I think you probably get to see that more than anybody. What are some of the ways that you see creators making money out there that people might not think about?
Yeah, I mean, to Justin already named, I think, some of the like the obvious ones, but and I know he knows just as much as I do. There's like a million ways you can make money these days on the internet. All the way from even different, links that people can click, and there's courses available, there's merch they can buy. Your obvious ones that Justin mentioned, obviously like your AdSense from YouTube, all the Twitch revenue subs and ads and things like that. But yeah, pretty much if you're a creator and you have an influence and you have a following in a community, I mean, you can, as long as it's organic and like you're okay with how you're monetizing it, you can pretty much monetize anything you want to. So
Side note, Juan mentioned that courses are an option. He and I have both joked about doing one. I don't even know if anybody watches this podcast on YouTube or on Anchor or Spotify, but if you do, if I get one person to tell me to do it, I'll probably do it. So we'll see. That's awesome, man. How did you even get started as a creator, Justin?
So I got started as a creator a lot different than others. As you mentioned earlier, like it was on LinkedIn, which is probably the least sexy platform to actually create content on. And this was like years ago, probably like 7, 8 years ago
I,
at this
I think
point.
7, 8 years ago, you're right. I think it's pretty sexy now for a lot of
It
people.
has gotten a lot sexier for sure, but like I don't know when I was creating video had just gotten onto the platform. But really, the only reason that I started creating content was um, I couldn't find an internship to save my life, right? Like I did what I was supposed to do. I had the near 4.0 GPA. I joined the student clubs, but I was graduating, like I was coming from a non-target school, which was UCF, and trying to get a
Mhm.
job in the finance space or consulting world is a little tough if you don't have Harvard or Stanford on your resume. And so my way of standing out and like to build my network was let me create content on LinkedIn that was at that point really didn't have much content to create other than just talking about my college career and how it sucked trying to find a job. And that allowed me to meet the right people. That allowed me to understand my story better and understand my pitch when I actually did get interviews with some of these companies. And that ultimately got me to land, I think it was like 5 internships by the time I graduated, and 3 of those were at Fortune 500 companies. So that was the beginning of the sort of content journey. And that's honestly the origin story of why Declassified is what it is now, because I want to share those same cheat codes that I learned through my content creation to kind of help the younger version of myself who isn't necessarily going to that target school like a Harvard or Stanford, but can figure out how to finesse your way to getting those big boy jobs that everyone wants.
I think you and I actually have a kind of similar background in that, because I mean I was creating content my entire time at UCF, and the thing I learned was that you can call up anybody and they want to talk to you if you have an audience.
Yep.
You know, like I never expected to be able to hop on an earnings call and ask a question for like the CFO of EA and get a reply. But you know, when they think you're a press person, they're like, "Yeah, I got to answer this guy." You know, it was just kind of wild. You know, you could literally just show up and meet just about anybody you guys want. You know, and that was kind of wild to me, and it opened up a lot of doors for me, both at UCF and at UF when I was doing that, because I had the opportunity while I was a law student to even just go up and talk to like the head of legal for Xbox, and that never comes around if you're not putting in the time to network. And believe it or not, creating content is one of the best ways to network. You and I have a mutual friend, Michael Sakand, and like he created an entire business off just being the guy who basically talks about people, and suddenly that opens up the door for him to actually meet them in real life. And he just keeps shoving his way up the ladder, and it's just wild to watch. That dude is a bulldozer. At some point, he's just going to get where he wants to go, and it's awesome to watch that young people have learned. You don't need to kind of just shut up and keep your head down and do the work. You can create opportunities for yourself by, going out there and doing things.
Totally. I think from like the content standpoint, it built up the mindset of me to ask or be more of the mindset of like asking for forgiveness rather than for permission. Just because again, when you're creating content, especially when like we first started, John, it was like there wasn't really rules of what you could and can't do. And so it was just kind of like throwing things against the wall and seeing what worked. And that to me allowed me to be able to like, again, when I was interning at an insurance company, asking the CEO during a all hands town hall like a question when all the other interns are looking at me like, bro, what are you doing trying to ask this dude a question? I'm like, I don't know. Like, I just thought you could ask people questions. Like, why not? When am I ever going to get this other chance to ask a CEO a question? And I think that came from me having like a podcast and being able to talk to big names on the podcast, just because, again, reaching out via cold email, you get rejected so many times that you just become numb to the rules of society. Which again helps me as a creator, but it might not be the greatest if I went down the corporate route, though.
Yeah, honestly, two of the things I would say are the biggest help for my success in life have been the fact that I worked at a call center and learned rejection at a really young age. Because again, I was doing mortgage callbacks prior to like the mortgage collapse, for some loan officers. And again, all we're doing is just calling and saying, "Hey, sir, we got your information. It says that you want to do a refinance. Can I confirm these numbers?" And they all just yell at you. And it's just like you just get used to getting yelled at on the phone. And then I learned how to Twitch stream, and like I built an audience that you got to be able to talk when there's one person in the room. You got to be able to talk when there's 40,000 in the room. And both of those have their own unique trade-offs. People think that one is necessarily harder than the other, but it's like both are difficult. Because when you got 40,000 people, you're trying to pay attention to chat at some level, and trying to at least still be engaging. And you've got people just more or less screaming at you at that point. And then on the other direction, you've got nobody in the room necessarily. It's one of those things where you just got to know how to keep chat going, even if there's nobody there. You may have one viewer, and building up that audience can be a difficult process, but it'll teach you a lot. And then Juan, I know you kind of went more traditional and then came back to this kind of world to kind of work with creators. And what kind of inspired you to do that?
Yeah, so my long story short, so I don't sit here and just talk for 10 minutes. I basically in 2018 I moved down to Tampa for an internship, and 2018, the summer of 2018 is when I found out like what Twitch was. So I mean, I was not one of those people that knew what Justin TV was or anything like that. I feel like I found it late, but I guess there's still people finding it today. So maybe that's late. I don't know. But I basically found Twitch, really, really liked it. Was really intrigued by like the website and like everything that you could do, the communities that were being built and all that. So this is also like when Fortnite was popping off. It was like really popular, and like the competitive standpoint of that had just started out. So anyways, basically between like the combo of Fortnite competitive, which I think introduced me to the broader esports, because like truly I never really looked at that prior to Fortnite. And then Twitch brought me into live streaming again, really never looked at that prior. Really sparked my interest because like a lot of people already liked those things. And then yeah, long story short, to your point, I kind of started traditional in that I graduated from Auburn with an accounting degree, moved down to Tampa, was working at EY. So I went like the traditional, big four accounting route. That, as Justin's mentioning, is like the big boy job that like everybody wants to get. And during all this, I was kind of building up my business, trying to find creators that I could even help at a minimal level because I didn't have like my credentials or anything yet. And yeah, long story short, after about 7 months at EY, I was able to leave, jumped full time into my own business. One client led to another. Everything's basically been referral based since. And then now just past 2 years full time in April. So it was really for me just the passion. I really, really got into Twitch like the end of college. I tried like dabbling with streaming a little bit myself. At Auburn, we had like a bar that would host like Fortnite tournaments on Monday. So I went and did that and won like a couple $100 from winning it like 2 or 3 times. So it was just a lot of fun. And then, so the clientele really started out with Twitch streamers, but now over the last 2 years, I mean, to Justin's point, we've got people that do YouTube, TikTok, course selling. I mean, anything that you can do as a creator, we probably have someone that's at least doing something in it. So
one of my favorite examples of that is the three of us know a guy who literally sells paint on TikTok. And to me, it's just like, that is like one of the coolest things on the planet to me. I still just find it fascinating that, again, at this point, my wife started creating content around plants, and just, there's something for everybody anymore. And there's very unique paths out there. So what kind of advice would you give to someone, Juan, who's trying to turn being a creator into more of a business?
Yeah, I give them a lot of advice. But I would say some of the basics is like definitely when you're first starting out, because I feel like you could like at each different, there's a couple different stages that I feel like you could begin to probably add more things. Because obviously if you're someone that's just starting out and you have no idea where it's going to go, then I'm not going to say, oh, go do these 10 things, because we don't even know where you're going yet. But I think a good point to start is just find a community of friends that already maybe are a little bit ahead of you, right? And at least just because that's free information, especially if you're friends with them, and just kind of understand what they've done to succeed, like get, tips and advice, no different than like we might have mentors in our, respective professions, and like talk to them about, okay, how should we proceed doing things? I think that finding other creators that you get along with or that are genuinely your friends and you can ask questions is really important. But I'd say to answer your question, probably to give a little bit more advice, let's say someone who's kind of made that jump and let's say they're starting it full time and they're making at least enough to do that. I mean, not to like sell myself, but the earlier that you can work with an attorney, the earlier you can work with a CPA, the earlier that you can work with these professionals that are like in traditional business, I think the better, just because it'll help save so much stress and time on like all those things in the background that like creators really don't want to touch or do. And I think a lot of the times what I see most is creators kind of want to like do it themselves at the beginning, which is totally understandable, but it ends up almost either costing them more from like a monetary standpoint, or it was just like a total waste of time and they didn't even do it right, and we basically have to scrap it and start fresh. So and I totally get it, because it's no different than a business owner starting a real business, right? Like you're trying to do all you can to bootstrap it and like keep costs low and all that. But I do think that if you're serious about it, and I think a lot of the times, and John, I know you and I have talked about this, I think people sometimes think that the price tag associated with maybe doing X or Y thing is a lot higher than it might be. And there's obviously different price tags on different things you need, but to just get started, I think there's a lot of people in our profession that can help out at a lower end, or even sometimes just for free. If like, especially if Justin's like, hey, I've got this creator that I'm really, really good friends with, like, would you spend like 15-20 minutes talking with them? Like that's something that of course I'm gonna be like, yeah, of course. Like that's totally fine. So anyways, that's kind of like a rambled answer. But but
No, it
I'd
makes a
say
lot.
get a team around you.
Makes a lot of sense. I know on my end, one of the things I always remind them is like, don't quit your day job too early. Like one of the best things you can do is treat this almost like a side income at first. Because even if you are making some money, one of the worst places you can end up is where you're making less than you want. And you're suddenly just feeling like trapped month after month. And you're not able to meet your basic needs. Once your basic need, I mean, it's basically just Maslow's hierarchy of needs in a lot of ways. If you don't have shelter, food, and all of that, it's so much harder to feel like you're self-actualized and happy. You know, like if you have a basic job that can, pay for healthcare, and then you can work 35 hours there, and then you can grind 20 on a weekend or at nights. That's a much better place to start sometimes than going full time and going 80 hours a week into content creation and not having enough to pay your bills at the end of the month. That can be so stressful. Because I mean, I can personally attest to have being there before. Again, when you're in that spot where you're like, oh man, as a content creator, I can make like 30, 40K. That's cool as a college kid, but like once you start, trying to grow up and you're like, man, I might want to buy a house one day. I might want to do this. I might want to have a family. I might want to travel. It gets a lot more difficult, and it's really easy to look at the high end people and be like, they're killing it, they're making 6 figures, 7 figures, they're all I can do that too. And it's a difficult path sometimes.
Yeah, self-employed
Justin, I
health
know
insurance is not cheap.
Oh yeah, no,
look,
health insurance is nutty.
I had to do that this year. Oh my god, I hate.
Well,
I hate.
I'll even be honest. There's a joke among lawyers that the best way to be a self-employed lawyer is to have a spouse that's healthcare. And again, it's just even for me as someone who's solo and makes a decent bit, it's still expensive. It's wild. But Justin, you've been around the block here for a while. What kind of advice would you have?
I mean, definitely everything that Juan said. I think the only thing that I would add there for someone who's just getting started is like get really good and comfortable with asking questions. And the reason that is the case, right, is if you get really good at asking questions, you can probably get a lot of free advice from Juan. You can probably get a lot of free advice from John, right? Like from a lawyer or from a CPA perspective. And I have no shame in saying this. When I was like starting as a creator, right, making that 20, 30, 40 grand ish a year, I had no shame in asking people for like lunches, right, to ask really good questions with them. They would feel valued because I'm asking good questions. They're like, oh, this is great, like love everything that you're building, yada yada yada. And then they would also pay for my lunch, so it was like free lunch, being able to ask good questions with whatever person it is, right? But then you're also building your network, and you just never know what that ends up turning into. Right?
Yeah.
Like that's how we met John. And then through Juan, like through you, I met Juan, and then we've talked and helped each other meet a bunch of different people in the space as well, right? So I think I became known as the question guy in all of my internships, and I don't think that that's a bad thing. Whether you're doing that as public as I was, with like every single time they brought in someone for like a speaking engagement, I would always try to ask a question and then follow up with them because I had that sort of strategy. Or you can do it in a much more private lens, right? Of the one-on-one coffee chats or whatever it is. The only thing that I will say about that is just never ask someone to pick their brain. I hate that line, and people always suggest using that line. I don't know why. I haven't met someone that likes being told that or being asked that. It's like absolute worst thing. So that'd be my piece of advice there.
Yeah, I think looking back, one of the best things I think you did was, again, you kind of branded yourself as the LinkedIn guy for a little bit. And for someone like me, I was like, hey, I'll answer some questions because I'm sure if I ask him a couple LinkedIn questions, he'll answer them too.
For sure.
So it's a little bit of that mutual benefit too, where it's just like, man, I can see this guy's going somewhere. He's smart. He's asking very good questions. You're not coming up to me and being like, what's it like to be a lawyer? And it's just like, dude, if you don't already know that one, like, like, there's a difference.
No, for sure.
There's a point where you can genuinely be asking that because, again, you're just kind of trying to learn it. But, again, start with your inner network on that one first.
You can tell when someone is like genuinely asking that question because they really want to know versus the person that like doesn't
They
know how
just
to
want to
start a
meet you.
conversation.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Like there's a difference. And again, I had to learn that through numerous like not necessarily cold calls, but like jumping on calls with people that I didn't know. But that comes with time. And I think if you can perfect that, which is a little hard, I like to call myself, I can fake being an extrovert when I want to. I hate like large gatherings and stuff like that. I'm more of an intimate sort of setting type of dude.
I
But I
think you
can
and I
turn
are
that.
identical on that.
I can turn it on when I need to, but I had to learn that skill. Like that internship at Northwestern Mutual really allowed me to understand what a cold call is. And I think that's super important skill to have in any field, but especially as a creator when you're getting started.
Yeah, I always tell people I recharge my batteries by being in either, a private group or a very, very small group, Um and that's just how it is, but at the same time, people always come up to me like, "You're so extroverted." I'm like, "No, I'm really not. This is draining me, but I'm good at it apparently, where nobody can tell."
Yeah.
And that's always a nice thing, but like I get hit up a good bit on, LinkedIn and other things by law students and stuff, and I'll almost always reply, no matter what, even if the question seems kind of, generic. But the thing is, I'm going to spend a heck of a lot more time on the person who says, "Hey, I looked you up. I really like what you're doing in this industry, this field. I want to work in this kind of space. Here's the areas of law I like. How would I do that? Or what advice would you have on like what classes I should take?" That's a much more nuanced question than just saying, "Hey, can you talk to me about law?" And like you can tell that the person put in enough effort that you're like, "Man, I want to, also put in the same amount of effort in replying back to you, because again, it's on some level, the way I always framed it when I was thinking about it that way is you stroke the person's ego a little bit. They're much more likely to want to reply to you than if it's just a complete cold call that you can tell that it's like insert name, please talk to me,
Yeah.
LinkedIn's got, I mean, Justin, I don't know how your inbox is since you use LinkedIn a bunch, but I mean, I get the most ridiculous LinkedIn messages where I hit delete on 95% of the messages I get via LinkedIn these days because it's just, to
That's
John's
'cause-
point, it's like insert name, here's this. And I got things that like don't even apply to me. And I'm just
Well,
like,
so
I don't know
well, and I'm
what
sure
y'all
they're
are
mostly
doing.
realtors, insurance agents, and financial planners.
so a lot of it comes down to like what you put in your headline. So like that's also why a lot of people will put emojis in their headline because they can instantly tell if someone's just like using a bot to do it because the bot will just scan like
That's
your name and it will,
clever.
right? So there's ways to like
Oh.
hack it. I think like if you put CEO or founder in your headline, you're more likely to get those messages, right? Because it just scrapes like these bots can just scrape that stuff. So like yeah, there's some hacks around it. Mine was really bad when I was like really into using LinkedIn, but the way that I got around it before was like I would put student in my bio and no one hits up a student because they're just like, this person's broke. So we're not gonna hit them up. I was like, hey, that's fine with me. I don't want to deal with all these bots. But yeah,
That's too
there's
funny.
some LinkedIn hacks for sure.
Those are cool.
That's awesome. Well, what are some of the bigger mistakes you've made getting where you are now, Justin?
I mean, last year I wish I knew Juan earlier. That probably would have saved me a big chunk of money. But on a serious note, like I think when it comes to mistakes, the biggest one that I had was thinking that I could have done this alone and being a lone wolf and thinking that being in Orlando, there weren't any other creators around me that could help me out. Yes, my core sort of creator friend group was we mentioned him earlier, Michael. I have a couple other friends, Sam and John. Actually, I think you've met Sam and John
Yeah,
too.
I've met both of them.
Yeah, so like that was kind of my core kind of COVID creator group, let's call it that. And we all grew together, which was awesome. But now that I've realized that literally anywhere has a bunch of creators, you just have to figure out where they are and like how to bring them together. Like the Orlando creator meetups, I think we're probably up to like 20 or 30 people every single time we host one of these things, which is crazy because like, again, not to be like sizest of creators, but 99% of the creators that attend these things have at least 100K followers or are making 100K from revenue with their creator businesses. And to me, that's insane that in a low market, so as Orlando could be considered, right? It's not LA, it's not New York. You can find 20 or 30 really big creators that can all help each other out. And I know that there are a bunch of others out there that we haven't been able to reach just yet, but I'm sure they will join soon. And so don't underestimate your location because they're probably out there. You just have to figure out where they are. And I wish I knew that when I was getting started 7-8 years ago, because I just thought that I was the only one doing it.
And then Juan, I know you have to be a little less specific probably on some of the examples, but what are some of the like generic mistakes that you've seen creators make?
Yeah, so generic mistakes. I would say one, and I mean, I feel like this is pretty basic. Like we've all probably heard this, but I still feel like I see it a lot. And I mean, you guys let me know how much you see it, but as simple as it sounds, like create an email that looks like a business email and not like some random, like your first name and then like 5 letters or something. Like, I don't know, like, create a business email that looks professional so that not only like when you're working with other professionals, but for brands and things like that, like you actually look like you've put in effort in trying to like come across as professional, versus having your Gmail from when you were, in the 6th or 7th grade that you still haven't changed. If that's in your Twitter bio. So change your email, make sure it's professional. I would say that know your worth in a way. Like I think that a lot of the times, creators don't know what their worth is. And maybe it's because you haven't worked with an agency before. Maybe it's because you're doing like your very first brand deal. And you just don't even know like what your content is worth. Find ways, whether it's engaging somebody that can give you that answer, whether again, it's going back and finding other friends that have had similar experiences, like truly find out what your worth is and don't just throw a number out and then like sign the paper because you're like, wow, like I can make $500 doing this. Like I would have never thought I could make 500. Well, that's cool. But what if the real number should be 3,000? Like then you just left 2,500 on the table. So know your worth, be responsive, like again, whether it's email, Discord, text, whatever it is, like some of the tougher clients that I've had down the past are the ones that are hard to reach. And look, I know creators are busy. We all know how busy creators get. You guys are running a business while trying to like also juggle all these other things. But, responsiveness a lot of the times I can speak from my experience, like in the value that I bring, responsiveness a lot of the times won't allow me to do my job correctly. And I'm sure that's the same for you, John. I'm sure that, on the agency, Justin, you can relate. Like if you're not being responsive and respectable to those that are helping you, or trying to help you, then that's just kind of like shooting yourself in the foot. Cause not only are you paying for it, but now things aren't even getting done right. So I could probably go on and on about a bunch of different mistakes.
Yeah,
but I think
now that I'm
ones
thinking
that
about it,
come
I'm
to
like,
mind.
man, we could do an entire podcast on just this
Yeah.
because I'm like, the moment you said emails, I'm like, creators, put an email in your bio, to start.
Yeah.
Like that's the lowest hanging fruit. If I'm a brand and I want to reach you, please give me a way to do it. And don't make me hop into your DMs that are flooded anyway and probably going to get sent to spam anymore because who knows what's going on anymore with Twitter. Like the algorithm is nutty anymore. I swear that like I see people who used to have just massive followings just dropping off like crazy anymore. So who knows? But that's a completely different conversation.
Sure.
I
But
would
yeah,
say
no,
add
I
one more that's really accounting related, if that's okay.
go for it.
Because this one just drives me crazy. Sorry, again, I could probably list like 20 of these things, but I'll just hit this one. Please, please, please consult somebody before you start an S Corp. I don't know how many times in the last 8 months I've seen, and John, you've helped me clean some of them up, where an S Corp or even a corporation, which is just crazy to me, was created for a streamer or a creator, and it just was not at all necessary, or it was done incorrectly. I've seen a lot of creators spend more money trying to fix things than what they originally thought was going to save them money. So again, before you go, and that probably goes for anything legal, John, that you could touch on, but don't like cheap out or just like take an action on something that has legal or tax implications without truly knowing what you're doing, because I've seen so many people spend and waste money that shouldn't have been wasted. So
well, and you've worked with creators that we have mutually that, again, they've brought a contract to me. I've been like, no, that price is too low. We need to raise it. We need to fix this. We need to do that. All of a sudden they get the bill from me and they're making more a month extra than what the original bill is. So every month they're making more than what they paid me. So I don't think they're complaining in that regard, and
right.
I think that was actually a really good point you made. It's just know your worth. There's too many creators out there who don't realize that if someone asks for exclusivity, that should have a little bit of a price. If they ask for the ability to use your content in an actual ad campaign, whether it's on social media or even in a TV spot, sometimes that should have worth. The fact that they're reposting your content on different things, sometimes people just get so excited, they're like, somebody sent me something for free, I can finally have this cool thing. It's like I'm gonna just tweet all about it, and it's like, well, they won, the influencer agency, the ad company, whoever, they won. It's like, I'm talking about Xbox because I have this little thing they sent me. It's like, cool, they're excited now because you just gave them a spot for free, and it's just like, know your worth. There's a difference. There's times where creator codes make sense, and there's times where you should just be paid a flat rate for whatever you're doing because you're bringing so much goodwill and brand recognition. And then, Justin, you work in a super unique space compared to a lot of the creators Juan and I work with, because you're not in gaming. And, when you're working with, big companies that are interested in, students who are trying to find jobs, there's probably maybe 4 or 5 big players in that space, so if you're working with one of them, you're probably blocked from working with the other 4 for at least a little time period. So you've got to, and I think that's something you and I have even talked about in the past was, how do you make the compensation match that concept?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Like it's again, the amount of stuff that I've learned over the past, let's just call it year and a half of really being able to monetize declassified has been pretty crazy. Everything from, right, like you were saying, video rights to exclusivity rights to all these different sort of terms that you need to kind of become a little bit familiar with if you're doing your own brand deals. Or even if you are just the creator and you have like a brand manager, I think you should still understand the game to be dangerous if you need it to be. I think that's something that a lot of creators shy away from a little bit, and sometimes they get screwed because they're like, "Oh, I just want to be creator. I just want to be the creative." And like, I understand that, I get that, but I think you at least need to understand the game, because if you don't understand the game, then you're probably getting played, right? Whether that's by your manager, whether that's by the company, like you need to make sure that you're understanding the terms that are going through that contract that you're signing. Because a lot of times you can get screwed on that, eh, not just now, right? But in the future. Like for instance, I have a friend who she's a mommy blogger, and something that her agent was telling me about was like something that she has to consider is the rights to the video in perpetuity. Because what happens if her kid is in a video now, but when the kid gets older, the kid doesn't want to be in a video anymore? But if that brand still has exclusivity rights to that video, she can't necessarily take it down. And so that's, again, more of a nuance depending on your niche and the content that you create. But those are just some things that I would have never even thought of until he had told me about it, when it comes to like people that are in your videos and stuff like that.
Makes a ton of sense. And I mean, from my perspective, one of the most frustrating things for me is fixing a contract retroactively is almost impossible. You know, if you go up to another party and you promise them X, Y, and Z, and then you either decide you don't want to deliver or you decide that they should be giving you more in return, it's very, very difficult to break those obligations if the contract wasn't drafted well to begin with. And all too often, especially, and this is a frustrating point for me, is a lot of times it's the younger creators or the smaller creators that are being taken advantage of. So they're the ones a little too scared to even come up and ask. But it's it's worth having things looked at. Juan mentioned it earlier. Things are oftentimes a lot cheaper than you actually realize if you'll just ask, especially if it's one of those things where, you're respectful about it, you're trending upward, people can see that it's going to be a long-term relationship. A lot of times, lawyers, agents, accountants, whoever are willing to give you a little bit of free advice just to kind of help you get along the way. And that is sometimes a heck of a lot better than just signing the agreement right away. I've had a few contracts I've had to unfortunately, have litigated or, at least brought through that process, and the bill ends up being 20 to 200 times more than what it would have been to just review it in the beginning. And, that's an unfortunate fact, just because basic litigation and people don't probably understand the legal system. And that's probably part of the problem is that basic litigation, it's going to take you a year and probably $30,000 to even get to a basic, point where you're sending in complaints and amendments to those complaints. You're not even going to court yet. That's just like the super low level stuff. And that's expensive and it's time consuming and it's stressful and nobody wants to deal with that. So it's better to just avoid it altogether. I don't even do litigation personally. Everything I do is transactional. Everything I do is, contracts, paper, helping people make money. Because my whole stance is the only people who win in court are lawyers. Nobody else is making money. Both sides are going to walk away unhappy almost every time, because either you spent too much money to get what you wanted, or, again, you just kind of got put in a bad situation because of, something that probably could have been avoided.
Justin hit on something that I thought was interesting when he just talked last, is that creators wanting to like do it all. So whether it's like managing your own brand deals or doing this, like, and I think to Justin's other point earlier of like thinking that, no different. And obviously, Justin, like you were creator turned agency / still creator, but even for these other creators that are just purely creators, there's obviously a certain time period where it's just you, and obviously it has to be just you, right? Like you've got to hustle and put in the work at the beginning, like there's no question about that. But there definitely comes a point, and I think you got to just be a little bit self-aware of it. I think having the right people that are friends and the right people in your corner that if you're not being self-aware of it, that can help you be self-aware of it, is that you got to eventually like start handing some things off. Like you cannot be as successful as you probably want to be as a creator without starting to like offset some of those things. And I mean, whether that's, for our clients, a lot of times that's editors, right? People that are doing the thumbnails, people that are doing the clips, things like that. I see a lot of creators that are like, oh, I want to do it because I want to keep my hands on it. And that's totally cool. If you're fine with like where you're like, hey, I'm good with this level and you're good with that, then it'll probably work. But I think a lot of the times the ones we see performing at a very high level like aren't doing those things, right? Like a lot of my top performing gaming clients are not touching their clips. They're not touching their thumbnails. They're involved in the creation process, but like that's been totally offboarded to, an animator or an editor that's doing that work for them so that they can keep, pumping the main engine. So I think like understanding that, yeah, it's going to start out as you and you're going to hustle and build it up to where it's sustainable, but then you've really got to like bring an outsourced team in to help you in all of these areas is like really, really important. And I always think back of the clip like years ago where Ninja was playing with like a couple, I can't remember who the three people he was playing with. And one of the guys mentioned like, man, like I'm not getting any sleep. Like I'm streaming, then editing, then scheduling, then this. And I remember Ninja was like, why are you doing all of that? He's like, I don't even do that anymore. Like, he's like, I've got this person doing that, X person doing this. Like all those things got to get offloaded. Otherwise, you're probably not going to grow as high as you want to be. And your mental is just going to be like in the gutter.
So. Yeah, no, it's just a perfect example of, again, just like opportunity cost, someone like Ninja, every minute that he streams is more valuable than every minute he edits, doesn't matter if he's theoretically a great editor, you can hire someone much cheaper than him, and I think that's the great point to make. And that's even why, a lot of times I'll tell creators, don't quit your day job right away, is because the moment you quit your day job, you need that money that you're bringing in to go to you to support your lifestyle. If you have a job that you, again, can work, even if it's just 20 hours and cover your basic bills and stuff, and then use some of your creator money to hire an editor or hire an accountant or hire a bookkeeper or whatever, something that you don't like to do, that again, it's an opportunity cost thing. You get to spend more time on what you're actually needing to do, what's actually going to drive your business forward. It's something I tell every single CEO I work with, even at a small business. Eventually, you got to divest yourself of all these things. You got to promote yourself out of a job. I mean, it's good advice even for most employees. If you're at a company working and you've got this task list of things to do, until you can get rid of it to where you're not needed in that system, you can't get promoted. You can't move on to the next thing. And as a
Right.
content creator, that's what you want. You want to be able to do this theoretically full time. You want to be able to, do the parts of the content you love. So if you love streaming, then sweet. If you love the editing, I get it, but like sometimes it's something that you just got to let go of and let other people take on. I agree with you.
Yeah. And the only thing I think I'll add is don't be entitled about it, because I do see that sometimes. Like, again, you have to hustle. No different than the three of us here had to hustle at some point all by ourselves. Like, you have to lay the groundwork. There will come a point where it's obvious. I
Mhm.
sometimes see creators get a little entitled with like, oh, I need like this full-time assistant, or like I need X person, and like now I'm not going to touch it, or like I'm not going to be involved. And like that's not the right mindset either, right? Like there will come a point where it makes sense, and financially you have to make sure it makes sense. So don't be entitled about it, but definitely be aware of like when you're like, you know what, maybe I shouldn't be working on this anymore because I need to spend more time doing this.
Well,
So
and I see that in general business too. I'll see a guy's like, well, I'm the CEO. The CEO doesn't do that. I'm like, you're the
right.
CEO of a one person company. Like
Right.
there's a huge difference between writing on LinkedIn, blank blank CEO of blank blank LLC, and being Tim Cook. You know,
Right.
huge difference. If all you're doing is sitting on Zoom calls and telling people to do work, are you really creating value, or are you just kind of honestly just micromanaging the hell out of people to the point that they're going to go insane? There's a massive difference between knowing what to let go of and just not doing anything. And I think that's kind of what you're getting
Yes.
at there, Juan, is you
That's what I'm
can't be
getting at.
so entitled that you expect everyone to grow your channel for you. You can't blame your video editor when your videos aren't hitting. A lot of times they've got to work with what you give them.
Right.
Uh, and all of it's important. Every single part of that process is essential.
Right. Totally agree. Totally agree.
What were some of the things that you eventually did hand off, Justin, that kind of helped you grow a little quicker? Because I know you have a team that you've worked with.
Yeah, so for me, editing was number one. I hated editing. I was like, why am I spending 3 hours on this video? Because again, my passion was never editing. I had more of a business mindset. So I'd spend 3 hours editing this like 40-second video. And I'm like, there's gotta be a better way to do this, man. There's gotta be a better way. So hired an editor first. Shout out to James. James has been amazing. Ever since we brought him on. And then after that, I realized for Declassified, it was like, yes, I love creating this content, but when I looked out into the space, everyone in the sort of college to career niche was usually someone that was like 1 or 2 years into their career, or they were like an older, usually dude talking about like how to get a job from 20, 30 years ago. And I was like, okay, how do we be unique in this space? And I wanted to make sure that our face was always young. And so that's why JC was the face of the page. And now Brian is the new face of the page. And I am no longer, I'm more on just the back end, and I get to do the stuff that I really like, which is like the brand deal side, building up the team, making sure that all of our projects are running smoothly and stuff like that. So those were the first 2 to 3 things that I offboarded, was editing, the face of the page, so the actual creation or creator role. And then we actually have a project manager as well who like posts our content and everything, because that's as easy as that task is, it is more and more annoying the more that you have to actually just manually post something on social media. As entitled and annoying as that sounds, it is probably one of the most annoying things when I talk to creators that they actually have to do, because all of the posting platforms like Later and all that stuff, they suck. at what they do.
Sounds like there's a need for someone to fix that.
Probably. I don't know. It seems like every single scheduling software that we've used, or like all other creators use, it doesn't work the way that they want it to work. Which is, again, not my issue to solve, but someone.
Well, I would imagine some of that has to do with, the different apps just not wanting to play nice with each other.
For sure.
The nice part about Elon taking over Twitter is we've kind of gotten to see under the hood a lot because he just openly talks about everything, So it's just like he'll basically say, "Yeah, I'm turning off API calls for these people because they don't pay enough money," and it's just like, what? This is like, I love TweetDeck. Don't get rid of that. Like stuff like that. But you mentioned earlier that you kind of had like a COVID creator group, and I would also say that just kind of happened to coincide a little bit with like the rise of short form in general. And what have you kind of seen different from going from like what I would call LinkedIn broetry, to more of this short form content?
So Declassified College, our page, we blew up from 0 to 100K in like a month. And we were able to start monetizing from there pretty well once we had that following. And a lot of people see that, they're like, oh, it's overnight success. And I'm like, sure, you could say that, but right, they don't see, like you have, John, the 6 or 7 years of like trying content out on LinkedIn and seeing what works and what doesn't work. And is there a difference between written content and visual content? Sure, but there's a lot of similarities that you can take from both, right? Like both have storytelling aspects of it. One is just visual and one is just written. The same way that we had to position, or when I was creating LinkedIn content, where I have to really pay attention to those kind of the first like 1 to 4 lines to make sure that that grabbed your attention so that you could click see more, so that the algorithm would be like, oh, this is an interesting post, and they would promote it to more people on LinkedIn. I now have to transition to the first 4 lines on LinkedIn written to the first 3 seconds of visual content and what you say on TikTok, right? So it's very similar skills, just kind of positioned slightly differently. But the reason that we wanted to go short form video wise was when it came to career related content, LinkedIn was really the only platform that it actually worked on. Because if you think about like Instagram, if you think about even Facebook or Snapchat or anything like that before TikTok, no one really looked up career related stuff. You know what I mean? Like it takes a special type of person to really look up like, how do I get an internship on Instagram? No one was doing that, right?
Yeah.
So our content would never get promoted. But because, again, everyone has that thought in their head when they're in college, but no one wants to Google it on Instagram or search it on Instagram. Since the TikTok algorithm promoted stuff to you, it kind of scratched that itch in the back of your head. So you wanted to stay and watch the full video. So I think once I realized that, like the TikTok algorithm and just short form algorithm in general push stuff to you rather than you having to go out and search for it, I was like, we can leverage this. And I think that's why our page has done well. People like my friend Gohar Khan, who runs a college application page, is absolutely killing it, right? Because these are all questions that high school students have, and they might just not know how to Google it or search it up on other platforms or want to. But when it pops up on you, you want to watch the full video. You're like, a cheat code. Let me figure this out.
Yeah, honestly, most of my content creator days were, even before those 2 platforms were super popular. And, again, what we would do is we'd have to figure out the algorithms behind things like Dig, the algorithms behind like N4G was a big video game aggregation site for a while. What would get those 2 to kind of promote you up? What would get, Google to pay attention to you? And again, like for when we were running a website, Google was the breadwinner by far. It's going to send you. Something may go viral one day, but Google's going to send you an absurd amount of hits every single day if you create the right kind of evergreen content. And so much of that was figuring out what people just want to ask. Because like you said, so much of it comes down to knowing where is someone going to look and what are they going to ask and how do you frame it to where they immediately think this is my answer, And that works for just about any business beyond just, a creator. even someone in my position, trying to figure out, who's going to look for a lawyer for this, And I mean, ironically enough, I remember when I first started off, Yelp kept calling me and claiming, we're the greatest place to advertise as a lawyer. And I'm just sitting here and I'm like, I don't think there's any CTOs that are going to be sitting there on Yelp and then being like, man, I need to find a technology IP corporate attorney or something. I'm like, just it just doesn't
Probably
seem
not.
right.
Probably not, for sure.
I mean, first off, I rarely go on Yelp to begin with, but even if I was, I'd assume it's because I'm just trying to figure out what restaurants are dog friendly nearby or something.
I think the only time I pull up Yelp is when I'm looking at a restaurant and the Yelp reviews come up. Like,
Yeah.
I don't even know if I've ever pulled up Yelp to specifically look for something.
I look up Eater if I'm looking up like where's good food in a location I'm not familiar with, or to be honest, I have that buddy that used to, do some food blogging stuff.
Oh, true.
The one that out in LA, because Juan and
Yeah.
I went to an event out in LA last year, and my friend's recommendations were all fire. And they were all
10 out of 10.
moderately priced. I was like, all right, between him and our other mutual friend Ben, I'm like, these guys can be our chief ordering officers anytime.
Good food. Hey, it's always better with good food.
Dude, good food makes everything better. Every conversation's better with good food. Every event's better with good food. It's like, don't skimp on the food, people. It gets people talking and wanting to show up.
Totally.
But Justin, this is I think another good question that kind of ties off on even just the fact that you kind of went from LinkedIn to kind of short form on TikTok. When should a creator start looking to diversify, and like how do you diversify your content better?
So my perspective on this, I think, is a little different than others in the way that I wouldn't necessarily start diversifying until you have the team behind you to be able to do that. And the reason that I say that, right, like everyone or most people will say, like, diversify as quickly as possible. You want to grow your Instagram the same way you grow your TikTok, the same way you grow your YouTube, yada, yada, yada. And yes, do I think that is true in general? Totally. But the actual process of doing that can be really draining for most creators, especially the ones that I talk to, because like I was joking kind of earlier, like having to actually schedule and manage posting on different platforms can be really tedious, as, like, again, entitled as that sounds, that can burn you out, especially if you're posting multiple times a day, as I know some creators do, especially with short form content, which is, to me, is insane, but I know some people that do that. When you're posting one time a day on every platform, that becomes not just one post a day, that becomes 5, 6, 7, 8, depending on where you're posting, right? Because it's like, okay, if I want to post on TikTok, I can then repurpose that easily, quote unquote, easily to Instagram Reels. Then that goes to Facebook Reels. Then that goes to YouTube Shorts. But then I got to promote it on my Instagram story, right? So how many stories do I put up? How many YouTube Shorts do I do? Do I combine everything to a YouTube long form video, right? So then I don't think it works out well for most creators until they have someone that they can pay, or they start building out like an editing team to take other stuff off of their plate to make it make sense. Because I've seen a lot of people burn out. Because especially once you stop seeing that like exponential growth, you're like, oh man, is this really worth it? And if you don't see it off the beginning, it can really be draining on the mental health side of things.
No, that makes a lot of sense, because I mean, just think about it from just a generic business perspective. If you focus on too much, sometimes you don't do anything well. And if you're trying to just grow on every single platform simultaneously, sometimes you just don't have the bandwidth or the focus or the time. I just know, looking back on my own kind of content journey, two of the things I wish I'd done better is diversify the type of content I was putting out a little bit better. Because again, I was covering mostly indie games on Xbox. That was very specific, and it worked incredible when Xbox was the super popular brand on the Xbox 360 era, and things were going awesome, and everybody knew what the term XBLA meant, and Steam wasn't really a thing yet. And then suddenly Steam comes around and becomes the big dog, and Xbox screws up royally with the Xbox One launch, and now you have Gen Z people who've never known that Xbox was popular. They're like, what is this thing? Why is it so dorky? And it's just like it's a wild concept to me that again, if you're not paying attention, you can quickly go from being kind of on top in a great kind of spot to suddenly irrelevant, not even because of your own actions,
Yeah.
but because of the thing that you're focused on covering is no longer popular. And I see that with a lot of creators in games. A lot of Warzone creators right now in particular are ranting and raving about the fact that Activision's just screwing up the game or whatnot. I don't have an opinion on it because again, I don't play it enough. But the viewership's down. People aren't paying as much attention. I mean, obviously, we're also going into a potential recession, so being a creator right now, that's got to be a stressful point to begin with, because again, when you're so dependent on things like subs and donations and whatnot, how do you kind of prepare for that?
Yeah. I'd like to two quick
Yeah.
things. One, I'd love to hear Juan's perspective on like the not necessarily livelihood of creators, but just you probably know again more than John and I, of because you can see the income of creators go up and down depending on like different cycles of stuff.
Yeah,
So I'd
the
love to hear your
volatility.
perspective. Yeah, the volatility of that, right?
Yeah.
But the second thing that I wanted to add on is I think, John, the conversation that you're talking about, I think is a little different.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is, so I have another business called Always Be Creating, and it's kind of like an Asian paid creator community online.
Yeah.
And we brought in Andrew Leonard from YouTube to come and give a talk. And Andrew is like head of creator acquisitions, which is, I personally think, the coolest job in the world. Like his literally job is to bring people that are popping off on different platforms to YouTube, which is really dope. But he was saying that the way that he likes to look at content is the 3 bucket strategy. And so to your point, you've got like your one main bucket, which is like the stuff that's working, right? The viral stuff that's going to hit a wide mass. And you've got your second the bucket that I think a lot of people sometimes hit on, but most don't, which is like building fan loyalty, right? The ones that do it the best, they're the ones that survive the longest. But the third bucket is Justin? What? Can you hear me?
Or did we lose me? Yeah.
Oh, I'm here.
It just froze for a second.
Okay. So second bucket is like building that loyalty with your fans, right? But the third bucket is what a lot of people, and you just kind of talked a little bit about how you missed this bucket, John, which is you want to try things every once in a while, whether that like, let's just say you're posting 5 times a week, right? Like one post out of every 5 should be something new just to see if it hits. The example with Declassified was when I was the face of the page. It originally started off as like meme stuff that was decent but didn't really work out, and then we moved into storytelling without my face on it, and that was doing really well, and then it started dropping off, and then so I started doing storytelling with my face, and that started doing well. But then we tested out Man on the Street, and that got, I think, like 19 million views over 3 videos, and we're like, all right, bet, let's go all in on that. And then we've been riding that wave, and now Man on the Street is kind of like plateauing a little bit, and so we're testing different stuff here and there, or like different styles of Man on the Street too. And so I think the ones that do the best, and you see it with like the KSIs of the world and stuff, they're constantly testing things,
kind of iterating
in a while. Yeah, because you never know when your wave's going to end, right? But you want to make sure that when that next wave starts, you've got the reps to be able to.
Well, and I think that was, kind of the perfect storm when it comes to like looking back on my own stuff, was that, again, I was going to law school as this shift was happening. So it was very, very difficult for the first year of law school to kind of, really kind of, try to pivot, because suddenly you just don't have any time anymore, but yeah, no, I think that 3 bucket strategy makes perfect sense. But Juan, I would love to hear a little bit kind of about, the volatility of, being a creator. And again, what kind of swings do you see, even with, obviously generics, but, What can you tell us? You know?
No, I'll lay out for you guys X creator next deal. No, I'm kidding.
I'd love to see
No.
that. I'd love to see that.
No. But before I answer that question, I was just gonna say, because I think this is a great point y'all are bringing up, is, and I think it's important for people to hear it, is because Justin, basically what you're alluding to is it is an ever evolving industry. And I think people understand that, but I think that is different understanding it than actually experiencing it. And so I think that some people need to be self-aware about that. John, going back to your earlier question of like, what advice would you give a new creator? I would say like, be okay that if you try it out and you like try to go into it and it doesn't work out the way you want to, because to Justin's point, it's so ever changing. Like you could love being man on the street, but if that dies down and you don't want to change, then like just maybe be okay with the fact that, okay, you know what, like I might just not have the crazy success being a creator that I want to be, but I can still do what I'm passionate about. And maybe it creates a little bit of like side income, right? No different than maybe like Twitch streaming doesn't pop off for you, but you're passionate about it. So you keep your W-2 job, but you have a community, a small community you stream to like on the weekends or like 3 nights a week or something like that. I think that like with as much as the creator economy has kind of blown up and gotten popular, a lot of people are putting a lot of mental strain on themselves and putting themselves like in dark places if they don't reach a quota that they think everybody else is reaching. And I think that you just got to be self-aware of like, are you even, and not to sound like downer dog or anything like that on people, it is like, should you even go as far as you're wanting to go, or should you just scale it back and be okay with that because that's what makes you happy and you're passionate with? Because to Justin's point, like it changes literally so quickly. But to answer your guys' question, I would say I've seen a lot of different things over the last few years. I've seen a creator that, you know, and I'll remain generic with the numbers, but basically was making low to mid 6 figures and then has dropped down and is now making like a little under 6 figures, which is still not a bad income. And other creators that are making like a couple thousand would be like, well, I'd kill to make like 60, 70, 80,000. But again, for that person, it's just a different perspective now. So I've seen like that drop off. In the current economy with like the recession looming and all that, it's been interesting. We have some creators that I've seen that their sponsorship dollars are like really down. Others are really up. Like I have 2 creators right now that each have like a $50,000 sponsorship. And it's not like this is their only sponsorship dollars for the year. Like this is just one of the many sponsor deals they currently have out. I think it just really depends on like, what kind of creator are you? What kind of brands are relevant to you? Like which brands have money to spend right now versus which brands don't have money to spend right now? Because obviously all these companies are in different industries and some are up, some are down, some are kind of like, you know, just making by. So I think it depends on like what kind of creator you are. But I think it's also really important holistically to understand like how much of my overall income do I rely on for sponsorship dollars? Because I think if you have that answer, then when we go into recessionary type periods like this, whether we're in it or about to go into it, I think that you can be a lot more self-aware of like, okay, what should my spending habits change to? What should I expect my income to look like? Because if you're a creator, let's just say makes $100,000 a year, but the last 2 years, 80,000 of it has been sponsorship dollars, then given how things are, you probably should approach this year a little bit different with your spending habits and how much you're investing in the business, because maybe you're not going to make 80% of it off sponsorship dollars. So I've seen different things. I have a couple people that are outside of, let's say, traditional creators, and they're kind of more so in like general entertainment, that still have to deal with advertising dollars. Like their business still revolves around that. And it's like for sure down. Like they've been told like, hey, like, you know, to shoot this or to do this, like we just don't have as much money right now because we're kind of waiting to see what things look like. So that's like truly down. So I think the answer is it kind of just depends. But I think understanding like the impact of sponsorship dollars on your overall business can like help make it less stressful. Because if you understand that, then because like sponsorship dollars might not even matter to some creators, like quite honestly, like other creators don't even make that much from that. Like they make a lot from like all the other revenue streams they have. So it's kind of up and down right now, if that helps provide a little bit of context.
Well, for the creators that are doing, let's just say, great right now, what is some of the steps that you help take to help them when they may not be doing great 5 years from now? You know, what are you doing to kind of help them in the future? Because I know unlike a lot of CPAs, you go a little bit beyond just, bookkeeping and filing taxes. You kind of try to do a little bit of that holistic business management kind of financial planning.
Yeah, no. So for our clients that are, let's just say, the more higher earners, then yeah, to your point, we offer more so business management services to them. So part of that is a little bit more planning versus those that we don't. So like we don't, just for full disclosure, we do not place trades or investments or anything like that. We have great financial advisors that we work with who I really, really love, that do that, but it's a team effort, right? It's looking at like their taxes over the last few years. It's looking at their year as a whole right now. So we're looking at like, okay, what can your max retirement contributions be? Do you have an emergency fund set up? If so, like what kind of account is it in? Because a lot of the times I'll get like brand new clients that have multiple six figures sitting in a regular bank account that's earning them pennies on the month. And it's like, hey guys, like if you just put that in a high yield savings account that's earning, let's just say 3.25%, like right now, that's, you're actually like generating some money. You're not beating inflation. You're still well below inflation, but at least you're earning some real money. I see that all the time where like that's not even a step that people have taken. Like it's just sitting in a checking account. Obviously a financial advisor can help you kind of divide that money a little bit better than we can. But we'll look at the full year. We'll project out the year. We'll say, okay, like here's how we think you're going to do. Here's what max retirement contributions could look like. If we're, not to get like super, super technical, but if like we're depreciating an asset or you're buying a vehicle or like, all these different things that can not only affect your tax return this year, but for years to come. Those are all things that we're kind of helping people understand. But yeah, you got to plan for the future. I mean, we all know this, like, as a creator, you could be a creator for your whole life, but you're going to have your prime years. And if you're not organized and really on top of like your prime years, then I feel like you kind of mess up, the following years outside of your prime. I mean, we've talked about this, John, over and over. It really, from that perspective, it really is no different than like a traditional athlete or entertainer. Like you have your prime earning years. You have to do it right during those years, or you kind of screw up the years that follow.
That makes sense. And I think especially with, video game creators, it's hard to think of like maybe I'm in my prime right now, the creators I talk to that know that are normally my OnlyFans creators. They're well aware, like this is my earning years. It's like everybody else thinks it's going to go forever. That group has normally been the group that's like, I'm aware that I have a very short window to kind of make some money here, and then I need to set myself up for life. That makes total sense. Let's just kind of wrap it up here with, if you are trying to make yourself attractive to a brand, what steps can you take? What kind of advice would you have for someone, Justin?
Excuse me. So what I always like to tell creators is this is more from a negotiation perspective side of things, is always position yourself as a media company rather than just like a singular creator. And the reason I say that, even if you are potentially just a singular creator, it gives the perception that you have more bills or overhead that you would have to pay. So you can typically charge more. Now there are some ways to do that ethically and not ethically. That's up to you. And you can go down those rabbit holes yourself. I'm not going to share that here just yet, with a lawyer present and an accountant present as well. But what I will say is, like, it has allowed me to have more strength in my negotiation by saying like, oh, let me send this over to my lawyer, which I just literally send a text over to John, right? Like, yo, can you look over this real quick, right? But that allows me to seem a little bit more quote unquote legit, because especially some of these companies try to take, again, they've got lawyers on their end, they've got accountants on their end. So play the same game if they're playing, and you have bills to pay yourself. So just make sure to try to position yourself as best as possible. And a lot of the times it's like, if you're seen as a singular creator, let's just say you've got a brand deal for like 10 grand or something, the person on the opposite side is going to think, how the hell are we going to pay this person just 10 grand if it's just like one person making a TikTok video or something? But if you just say that, oh, I have to pay my editors, or I have to send this by my lawyer, or I'll check in with my accountant, or things of that nature, it at least clicks in their brain of like, oh, this person has a bigger team than just one person. It makes a little bit more sense if we pay them this 10 grand, or maybe we can up the budget to 15 or something like that. Which again can seem crazy to creators, especially when you're getting started. But I know from personal experience, it's allowed me to negotiate brand deals and turn, again, hundreds of dollars into thousands, if not tens of thousands.
I know one of the things that was always most successful for me was having some pitch on why me, you know? Why is my content specially aimed for your brand, you know? And one of the beautiful things when we were doing Xbox Live Arcade games is we were the only, channel that was really focused on indie games at the time to begin with, let alone specifically indie games on Xbox. So it's super highly targeted, super niche. In the same way that your channel right now is very niche, aimed at, students looking for work. So, people looking for that kind of audience, well, they're probably more likely to hit up Justin and be like, man, this is going to hit my audience than, going to some random person who does food blogs.
Mm-hmm.
It's just it's a different space, and that was very, very successful for me, is just learning how to explain that, working with me fits their own self-interest. Because at the end of the day, everybody else is just looking out for what makes their bottom line make sense. So if you can explain to them that, it makes it a heck of a lot easier.
Yeah, and I think the last thing too, that I'll add before sending it over to Juan is like, don't underestimate how much money you can make in a niche. Like I think niches are super underrated. I saw a viral Reddit thread the other day in the R Orlando thread that was like, damn, Bob's Barricades must be just racking in the money, because every time you're driving down I-4, which is the highway in Orlando, and there's like cones on the side of the road or they're like blocking up a road, it's always Bob's Barricades. And that's like a super niche of just like a guy that rents out construction cones as well as like barriers for like concerts and stuff. But because he's stuck within that niche and became that guy in that space, he probably charges a crap ton of money, and everyone, whether they're having an event or they need some traffic cones or whatever, goes to Bob's Barricades, right? So just don't underestimate the niches, man. So many people try to be the lifestyle person or whatever, which is cool, it's sexy, but it's a lot harder to sustain that thing compared to if you're able to build a loyal following within the niches.
It's really fun sometimes to quietly be doing a lot better than people realize, because you, again, have found your niche, you found your kind of, pond that you
like
can
the
become
paint
the
guy.
big fish in. Yeah, the paint guy is a great example. There's people out there who make wood pallets that are making an absolute killing, and you would have no idea, people who, like, I had a buddy who invested in a storage unit, during the pandemic. That thing killed it. He got like a 3,000 return. It was just absolutely absurd what he got back based on what he put in. And it's just like, there's money to be made in, just about any kind of niche, any kind of boring business too. And a lot of times that's almost more attractive because there's less people there. Everybody wants to do video games, but for example, I know, like, I was working with Loop, and Eric would always tell me, he's the CEO. He'd be like, we have people who can go live on Loop and sell sports cards and make thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars in an hour, and you've got people on Twitch that are just stressing about whether or not they're going to have 20 viewers. It's just mind blowing that, again, if you figure out your niche, you can kill it.
For sure.
I mean, John, you and I are niche in our respective businesses. Like,
exactly.
I mean, speaking for myself, like, creators right now probably make up 85 to 90% of my business. There's probably only a handful, and probably John knows them because we work on a lot of them. John probably knows the select that I could count on my hand that aren't creators.
And they're largely my companies that I've kind of been like, Juan, please help me.
But my point is that, and I've even had, I've had a couple other professionals, come to me and say, are you really going to like only work with, because like I've had like, and John, if we were off the call, I could tell you who, I've had people like try to send me a couple referrals over there. Like, hey, like this would be like a great client for you to work with. Like you would make money off this client. And I tell them no right now, because I'm like, no, like this is where this is where my passion is. So this is where I know that no matter how hard it's going to be, I'm going to keep pushing because I'm passionate about it. But to your point, Justin, it's extremely niche. Like most, normal friends or family, if I'm like, oh yeah, I'm working with like creators, they're like, what are you doing? Like, what does that even mean? But when people are coming to you and you're like the person in that area, different than the paint client we're talking about, it's a lot easier to sell yourself. It's a lot easier to grow that business.
Well, it's a lot easier to do the work when you like it,
Exactly.
One of the biggest pieces of advice I've ever had for any attorney that asks me questions about start solo practice, I'm like, learn to say no. It's too easy to just be like, I need to make X dollars a month and I'm going to take anything I can to get to that point. But the problem is, the more you do that, the more you trap yourself in this hole of like, you're doing work that you're not as efficient at. You may not even know how to do it. And you're now having to do a ton of research. Your hourly rate just drops dramatically on what you make based on how much time you put in. And I mean, I think that goes for a lot of creators too, is if you kind of get, stuck in something that you just don't like doing, it's not worth chasing those deals. There's plenty of deals out there for stuff that is in the areas that you do like to do. Don't suddenly promise to edit a ton of content on like video walkthrough guides for a game if you absolutely hate doing that style of stuff. If everything you do is comedy based, don't try to become the guy teaching people where all the seeds are in Zelda. It's just it's a different audience, different type of work.
And I think you can unintentionally, to your point, put yourself in that corner, and then it's hard to get out of it. And so now you're miserable. Now you're doing work you don't want to do. I had like a creator that a few weeks ago was like, things are kind of down, but if I did this video, I would make money. And they're like, but I don't want to do that video. Like I don't want to do that. So I'm trying to figure out what can I do differently for the stuff that I do want to do. And to your point, John, on our professional side, if I was a CPA that just said yes to everything and all of a sudden we start doing a good job, well, guess what's going to happen? We're going to have like this whole variety of clients that are all over the place. And the next thing you know, you're going to have too much work and things you're not passionate about to even have the time to focus on the work that you are passionate about. So learning to say no is like a huge, huge skill. That's kind of scary though.
No, well, it's a skill that's even harder when you're not, fed. It's so much easier to say no when you're at least ramen profitable. If you're at least knowing that you're at the point where you can afford to eat what you need to, you can pay your house, you can pay your electric, you can pay your rent, whatever. You can pay for your basic needs each month. Maybe you're not going out and eating sushi every night, but you can like at least afford to like, live. It's so much easier to say no. So that's why I always, remind people, I'm like, make sure you can get to that point. And even if that means don't quit your job right away, because again, otherwise you get trapped in that hole of, and I mean, looking back even at your own career, Juan, I could see a world where you could have ended up there if you hadn't been so quick to be like, no, because there were certain clients that I remember working with on you and you're just like, this is just not what I love. Wasn't that you weren't doing the work well. It wasn't that it wasn't being done. It wasn't that it wasn't paying well. It just wasn't what you love, So being able to say no was huge.
Yeah. When I say I got 85 to 90% creative clients, I'm very blessed in that aspect. Like I'm very, very like lucky in that aspect. But to your point, you have to say yes to certain things at the beginning if you want to go on your own just to grow it, like you're saying. Mm-hmm. But I think there's a certain, like Justin was saying, it's a skill that's got to be learned. I forget what you were talking about earlier, Justin, that you kind of had to learn it. It's a skill that like, as you're progressing, I think it's no different than as a creator. Like maybe you start in being like the man on the street, right? Because that was blowing up, but you slowly start to like go away from it. And so you are fully away from whatever you were doing that made you popular, but now you're known for this. And for me, that's kind of what I did. Like I had some creator clients I was working at the beginning, but it was honestly probably more like 60-40 non-creators. And what I had to do like over the last 2 years was slowly find opportunities to say yes to the ones I was passionate about, say no to the ones that I wasn't. And I mean, I'm making it sound a lot easier than it actually was, but it is a little like up and down game you got to play to filter it to where eventually it is primarily work that you're just purely passionate about. But
no, that's awesome. Do you guys have anything you kind of want to wrap up with? Otherwise, I think it's been a great talk.
I think this has been dope. This is awesome. Thank you, man.
Yeah. Appreciate both of you guys joining. And I'll get this posted, and hopefully we'll have another reason to chat about this stuff soon.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Later.